I am calling to say I bought your lake house.
The owner's son signed every paper.
Mom, I had to do it. The lake house is sold.
I woke up from heart surgery, believing the hardest part of my life was finally behind me. Then my phone rang. "Mrs. Parker," a calm stranger asked. "My name is Daniel Brooks. I think I just bought your lake house." I smiled weakly, certain he had the wrong number. "I've never sold my home." There was a long silence before he quietly replied, "Then you deserve to know this before it's too late, because your son signed every paper." At that moment, the pain in my chest had nothing to do with the surgery. If you've ever trusted someone with your whole heart, I'd love to know your story in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And if emotional family dramas like this speak to you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support truly means more than you know. Before you can understand why losing that lake house nearly broke me, you have to understand that it was never just a piece of property. It was the last place where my husband Richard was still alive. When people hear the words lake house, they usually picture luxury, a vacation home with expensive boats, fancy furniture, and magazine-worthy sunsets. Ours wasn't like that. It sat on the quiet northern shore of Lake Charlevoix in Michigan, tucked behind a line of towering white pines that whispered whenever the wind came in from the water. The paint on the porch had needed fresh coats more times than I could count. The dock creaked every spring after the ice melted. The fireplace stones were uneven because Richard insisted on laying every single one himself. It wasn't perfect, it was ours. Richard used to joke that he built the house one paycheck at a time. When we were first married, we couldn't afford contractors. Every Friday evening after work, he'd throw a toolbox into the back of his old Ford pickup, and we'd drive the 3 hours north with sandwiches packed in a cooler. I'd spend weekends painting walls or planting flowers while he hammered boards until the sun disappeared behind the lake. Sometimes we'd be so exhausted that we'd sleep on an air mattress surrounded by unfinished walls. Those were some of the happiest nights of my life. 28 years later, when Richard died from pancreatic cancer, that little house became the only place where I could still hear him. I know that sounds foolish, but grief has its own language. Every room carried his fingerprints. The kitchen cabinet he built because I complained about never having enough storage. The porch swing where we'd drink coffee every morning before the loons began calling across the water. The old maple tree, where Ethan insisted on hanging a tire swing when he was 8 years old. Every inch of that property held a memory. Some memories made me smile. Others still made my chest ache. But I never wanted to lose any of them. Ethan used to understand that. When he was little, every summer felt like an adventure. He'd wake before sunrise carrying a fishing pole almost taller than he was. "Dad, hurry, the bass are waiting," Richard would pretend to groan dramatically. "The fish can wait another 5 minutes." "No, they can't," Ethan would shout. "They'll think I forgot them." I'd stand in the kitchen laughing while flipping pancakes, listening to my boys argue over imaginary impatient fish. Those mornings felt endless. Back then, I believed they would last forever. When Ethan became a teenager, he learned to drive on the gravel road leading to the lake house. When he graduated high school, we celebrated on the dock with homemade pie instead of expensive champagne. When he proposed to Vanessa years later, he asked for my blessing while we sat on that same porch watching the sunset. That house had witnessed every important chapter of our family's story, which is why I couldn't understand what happened later. Somewhere along the way, Ethan changed. Not all at once. Slowly. So slowly that I almost missed it. After college, he moved to Grand Rapids and started working in commercial real estate. He was ambitious from the beginning. He talked about investments, equity, market trends, portfolio growth, words that meant very little to me. Every conversation somehow ended with numbers. This neighborhood doubled in value. That property appreciated 40%. Mom, land isn't emotional, it's an asset. At first I laughed. I suppose that's true if you're reading a spreadsheet. He smiled politely, but he didn't laugh with me. The first time he suggested selling the lake house, I honestly thought he was joking. Mom, do you realize what it's worth now? I know exactly what it's worth. No, financially. I wasn't talking financially. He sighed. You barely use it anymore. I use it enough. You could buy a nice condo closer to the hospital. I don't want a condo. You could travel. I already know where I want to be. He rubbed his forehead the way Richard used to whenever he lost an argument. Only Richard would eventually smile. Ethan never did. Over the next several years, the conversations became more frequent. Then they became arguments. You can't keep living in the past. I'm not living in the past. You are. I'm remembering the people who built my life. They're gone, Mom. The words hit harder than I think he intended. I looked out across the water before answering. So one day when I'm gone, will you say the same thing about me? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked away. I wanted to believe he simply didn't understand. That youth sometimes mistakes memories for clutter. That someday, when enough years had passed, he'd feel differently. After all, grief often teaches lessons that comfort never can. Life continued. He and Vanessa visited less often. Their conversations increasingly revolved around money. They drove newer cars, took expensive vacations, talked about investment opportunities I couldn't begin to follow. Whenever I offered to help with dinner, Vanessa would smile kindly, but immediately return to discussing mortgages or property values with Ethan. I noticed. I simply chose not to judge. Then, about 6 months before my surgery, something changed. Ethan suddenly became attentive again. He called every week. He drove up to see me more often. He repaired loose boards on the dock without my asking. I even replaced the old porch light Richard had installed decades earlier. One afternoon, while we watched geese drift across the lake, he quietly said, "Mom, you know I'd do anything for you, right?" I smiled. I've always believed that. His eyes lingered on the water. "I just want you to be taken care of." "I already am. You shouldn't have to worry about anything." "I don't." Looking back now, I realize he wasn't asking about my happiness. He was measuring my trust. When my cardiologist told me I needed surgery, Ethan immediately volunteered to handle everything. "I'll drive you to the hospital. I'll take care of your mail. I'll feed the birds. I'll check on the lake house. I'll handle any paperwork while you're recovering." He sounded like the son every mother hopes to raise. Grace even pulled me aside a few days before the operation. "You're lucky to have a son who's stepping up." "I know," I answered proudly. "I really do." The night before surgery, Ethan hugged me longer than usual. "Don't worry about anything, Mom." I squeezed his hand. "I never do when you're around." Those words would replay in my mind 1,000 times after I woke up in that hospital bed. Because while I lay unconscious with surgeons fighting to save my heart, someone was quietly taking away the heart of my entire life. The nurse had just finished checking my blood pressure when my phone vibrated again. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. The pain medication still made everything feel slightly unreal. My chest felt tight beneath the bandages, every deep breath reminding me that my heart had literally been cut open only 2 days earlier. But something about that man's voice lingered in my mind. I answered. "Mrs. Parker." "Yes." "This is Daniel Brooks again. I hope I'm not disturbing your recovery." I closed my eyes. "I don't understand any of this." "I know." His voice carried the hesitation of someone who wished he had better news. "I've been thinking about our conversation all morning." "So have I." "I don't believe you knew your house had been sold." The words landed differently this time. They were no longer shocking. They were terrifying. "I didn't." He let out a slow breath. "May I tell you what happened from my side?" "Please." For the next 20 minutes, I listened without interrupting. Daniel explained that he had been searching for a retirement property somewhere along Lake Charlevoix. His wife Eleanor had passed away 3 years earlier after a long battle with Alzheimer's. After spending decades running a construction company, he had finally retired. His dream was simple: find a quiet lake house, spend mornings fishing, read books on the porch, invite his grandchildren every summer. "It wasn't about investment," he said softly. "It was about peace." I understood that, more than he probably realized. He told me he first saw my property through an exclusive listing handled by Ethan. Ethan said he was representing you. My fingers tightened around the hospital blanket. He said you wanted a quick sale because your health was declining. I swallowed hard. He told you that, yes. He also explained that traveling back and forth had become difficult for you. None of it was true. Daniel continued. The asking price surprised me. Why? It was well below market value. That caught my attention. How much? He quietly told me the number. Even through the haze of medication, I knew immediately. It was nearly $200,000 below what comparable homes around the lake were selling for. Richard would have laughed in disbelief. He always kept track of local property values. Ethan said you cared more about finding someone who would appreciate the home than getting top dollar. A tear slid down my cheek. That sentence sounded exactly like something I would say, because it was. Somehow, my son had learned to imitate not just my signature, but my heart. I believed him, Daniel admitted. I thought your son was honoring your wishes. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me. When did you close yesterday morning? Yesterday. While surgeons were replacing one of the valves in my heart. My house had changed owners. I struggled to breathe steadily. Daniel must have sensed it. Mrs. Parker. I'm here. I'm so sorry. I wasn't angry with him. Not even a little. He sounded like a decent man caught in someone else's deception. What happened after closing? I asked. I drove to the property. And I expected an empty vacation home. Instead, he found something completely different. There were family photographs on the fireplace. My wedding picture. Yes. There were quilts folded over the couch. My mother made those. A pair of gardening gloves sitting by the back door. I used them 2 weeks ago. He paused. The refrigerator still had food inside. My stomach twisted. I thought maybe you'd moved out in a hurry. Then he described something that made my heart ache. He had opened one bedroom door. Inside was an old wooden crib. Not because anyone currently lived there, but because I had never been able to throw it away. Ethan had slept in that crib. Later, both of my grandchildren had used it during summer visits. It was too full of memories to discard. It didn't look like a house someone willingly abandoned. No. It looked like someone planned to come home. I covered my mouth. Daniel continued quietly. I walked outside. That's when I met your neighbor. Grace. I believe so. He described her perfectly. Gray curls, red gardening gloves, always carrying pruning shears. She asked if I was lost. What did you tell her? I said I'd just bought the property. What did she do? She looked confused. Then she asked where you were. I told her Ethan said you had moved permanently. Another silence. She stared at me for a long time. Then Grace said something neither of us would ever forget. Mildred's in the hospital having heart surgery. Daniel admitted that everything inside him froze. I thought she'd misunderstood, so I asked if perhaps there had been another owner. There wasn't. Grace apparently crossed her arms and answered with complete certainty. I've lived next door for 30 years. Mildred Parker has never mentioned selling this place. And if she had, I would have known. Daniel thanked her. But before leaving, he walked through the house one more time. That's when another detail caught his attention. There were framed photographs everywhere, family reunions, Christmas mornings, fishing trips, birthdays, Richard teaching Ethan to paddle a canoe, me holding newborn grandchildren. He noticed something else. Not a single photograph suggested I was preparing to leave. No moving boxes, no empty closets, no packed shelves, nothing. It didn't feel like a completed goodbye. It felt interrupted. Those words sent chills through me, because they were true. I had left that house believing I'd be back within a week. The flower beds still needed watering. My favorite cardigan still hung behind the bedroom door. Richard's old fishing hat still rested on its hook near the dock. Everything had been waiting for my return, except ownership. Daniel lowered his voice. So I started reading the paperwork again. You did? I'm not a lawyer. But something felt wrong. What? The timing. He explained that all of the closing documents had been rushed. Phone calls, electronic signatures, urgent scheduling. Everything seemed designed to happen quickly. Too quickly. Did you ever speak to me? I asked. No. Did you ever see me? No. Did you ever hear my voice? No. Only Ethan's. Only Vanessa's. Only the closing attorney. A cold feeling spread through my body. I suddenly remembered something. The week before my surgery, Ethan had insisted on bringing several folders to my house. He told me they were hospital insurance forms, medical privacy documents, emergency contact information. I had been nervous about the surgery. I signed wherever he pointed. I never read every page. At the time, I trusted him the way mothers trust their children, without conditions, without suspicion, without fear. Mrs. Parker, Daniel's voice pulled me back. Yes. I've emailed copies of every document I received. I don't really understand legal paperwork. You don't have to. There may be something important hidden inside. Just then, my hospital room door opened. My nurse smiled. Your son is here. My heartbeat instantly quickened. I looked toward the doorway. Ethan stood there holding a bouquet of yellow lilies. His smile was warm, comforting. Exactly the smile a loving son should wear while visiting his recovering mother. He had no idea that I had just spent the last half hour talking to the man who claimed to own my home. I quietly ended the call. Then I looked at my son. For the first time in 41 years. I wondered if I truly knew the man standing in front of me. Ethan smiled as though nothing in the world was wrong. He walked into my hospital room carrying a bouquet of yellow lilies and a paper cup of coffee. For my favorite patient, he said with a grin. I forced myself to smile back. Those flowers are beautiful. I figured the room needed some color. He leaned over carefully and kissed my forehead. How are you feeling? Sore, I imagine. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. The surgeon said everything went well. I know. I was worried. His eyes looked tired. There were faint dark circles beneath them that I hadn't noticed before. For just a second, I almost believed nothing had changed. Almost. Then Daniel's words echoed inside my head. Your son signed every paper. I studied Ethan's face while he stirred cream into his coffee. This was the same little boy who used to scrape his knees climbing trees. The same teenager who cried at his father's funeral because he thought he had to be the man of the family. The same young father who proudly placed his newborn daughter into my arms. How could that same person have stolen my home? I wanted to ask him immediately. Instead, I waited. If Daniel was right, I needed to know how far Ethan was willing to lie. So, I said casually, how have things been while I've been here? Oh, busy. He smiled. Just trying to keep everything together. I appreciate that. You don't have to worry about anything. There it was again. That sentence. The exact same words he had spoken the night before surgery. Don't worry about anything. This time they sounded completely different. They've already got me walking a little, I said. Really. The nurses say I might be home sooner than expected. His smile faltered. Only for an instant. But I saw it. You should probably take your time. I'll do whatever the doctors recommend. He nodded. Of course. An awkward silence settled between us. Finally, I decided to test him. Has anyone been by the lake house? His hand froze around the coffee cup. What do you mean? I was just wondering if everything's all right there. Oh, he relaxed. I checked on it yesterday. Everything okay? Perfect. No problems. None. He looked directly into my eyes. The place is exactly the way you left it. Lie. The word screamed inside my head, because according to Daniel, ownership had already changed. Someone else legally possessed my home. Yet Ethan didn't hesitate. He lied as naturally as breathing. I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like thin ice breaking beneath fresh snow. I've been thinking, I said. When I'm feeling better, I'd like to spend a few weeks at the lake. His fingers tightened slightly around the coffee cup. Maybe that's not the best idea. Why not? You'll need to stay closer to your cardiologist. I've always recovered well up there. This surgery is different. I'll ask my doctor. I really think. I said I'll ask. He looked away. Okay. There was another long pause. Then he reached into his briefcase. Oh, I almost forgot. He pulled out a thin folder. Just a couple hospital insurance forms. Immediately, my pulse quickened. Insurance forms, just like before the surgery. You don't have to deal with these now, he said, but whenever you feel up to it. He placed the folder on my bedside table. I didn't touch it. Instead, I simply nodded. I'll read them later. No rush. Something flashed across his face. Disappointment, nervousness, I couldn't tell. The nurse entered just then to check my medication, giving Ethan an excuse to leave. I'll be back tomorrow. He hugged me gently. I love you, Mom. I love you too. The words came automatically. They had always been true. The question now was whether love alone could survive betrayal. After he left, I stared at the unopened folder. Every instinct told me not to sign anything. Not one page, not one line, not one initial. About an hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Grace. My goodness, she said before I could even speak. How are you feeling? I'm getting stronger. Thank heaven. We talked about my surgery for a few minutes before I carefully changed the subject. Grace. Yes. I need to ask you something. Anything. Have you noticed anything unusual around the lake house recently? The silence on the other end lasted much longer than I expected. What kind of unusual? My neighbor instincts tell me you already know what I'm asking. She sighed. I wasn't sure whether I should say anything. Please. Tell me everything. Grace had lived next door for nearly 30 years. She noticed everything. Not because she was nosy, because she genuinely cared. About 3 weeks before your surgery, she began, I started seeing unfamiliar vehicles. What kind? A white SUV. A black pickup. And once, she hesitated. A survey truck. I frowned. A survey truck. Yes. I thought maybe you were having work done. I wasn't. They measured the property lines. My heart sank. What else? A photographer came by. A real estate photographer. I didn't know that at the time. He spent nearly 2 hours taking pictures. I assumed Ethan hired him for insurance purposes after the spring storms. Another piece slid into place. What did Ethan tell you? He said you were considering downsizing. I never said that. I know. Why didn't you call me? I almost did. But Ethan insisted he was handling everything because you were focused on your health. She sounded guilty. I'm so sorry, Mildred. This isn't your fault. There were more people. Who? 2 men walked through the house one afternoon. Ethan unlocked the door. They carried clipboards. They looked at every room. I closed my eyes. Inspection, preparation, planning. The entire sale had been unfolding while I believed my son was helping me prepare for surgery. Grace continued. I asked Ethan if you were moving. What did he say? He smiled. He said Mom finally realized it's time. The tears came before I could stop them. Time. Richard and I had spent nearly 30 years building that house, and my son reduced all of it to one sentence. Mom finally realized it's time. I should have questioned him more, Grace whispered. No, you trusted him. So did I. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, she asked quietly, Did something happen? I took a slow breath. Grace. I received a phone call yesterday. From who? The man who says he bought my house, she gasped. What? He says the sale is complete. No. I wish I were mistaken. That can't be legal. I don't think it is. She sounded furious. I knew something felt wrong. So did he. He called me because he discovered I was still in the hospital. Grace's voice softened. Then maybe God sent the right buyer. I hadn't thought of it that way. Maybe he had. Maybe out of everyone who could have purchased my home, it had ended up in the hands of the one man whose conscience mattered more than his investment. Before hanging up, Grace said something else. Mildred. Yes. I want you to remember something. What? The truth has a strange way of surviving. It hides for a while. But eventually, it always finds daylight. After we ended the call, I reached for the folder Ethan had left behind. Instead of opening it, I picked up my phone. There waiting in my inbox was Daniel's email. Attached were 23 scanned pages, purchase agreements, closing documents, property disclosures, and one document that made my blood run cold. Across the bottom of the final page, in handwriting almost identical to my own, was my name. Mildred Ann Parker. At first glance it looked perfect, but as I stared longer, something deep inside me whispered the same thing over and over. I didn't write that. I know my own hand. Someone had copied my signature. Very carefully, very patiently, but not perfectly. And for the first time since waking from surgery, I stopped wondering whether my son had betrayed me. I began wondering how he had done it. I spent nearly an hour staring at the signature. The hospital room around me faded into the background. Machines continued their steady rhythm. Nurses walked in and out. The afternoon sun slowly crossed the window. None of it mattered. All I could see was my own name, Mildred Ann Parker. At first glance, anyone would have believed it belonged to me. The long curve beneath the M, the gentle slant of the letters, even the flourish beneath my last name looked familiar. But the longer I studied it, the more uncomfortable I became. Something was wrong. Not something obvious. Something instinctive. I've signed my name thousands of times over 67 years. Teaching contracts, mortgage papers, school report cards, birthday checks for grandchildren, Christmas cards, medical forms. Your own handwriting becomes part of your body. You know it without thinking. And this signature felt like someone wearing my face. It looked close enough to fool strangers, but not close enough to fool me. My phone rang again. Daniel. I wasn't sure if you'd looked at the documents yet. I have. What do you think? I don't believe that's my signature. He didn't sound surprised. I was hoping you'd say that. Hoping. Because I noticed something. What? When we signed the closing documents. He paused, searching for the right words. Your signature looked different every few pages. I frowned. What do you mean? I've bought several properties over the years. Most people naturally sign their name a little differently each time. Yours didn't. It looked almost... He hesitated. Too perfect. That was exactly what had bothered me. Every signature was nearly identical. Real signatures breathe. Some are rushed, some are larger, some tilt slightly. Mine always did. Richard used to tease me because I never signed exactly the same way twice. Daniel continued. The person who signed those papers looked like someone trying to copy one signature repeatedly. I felt my pulse quicken. So you suspected something before calling me? Yes. But suspicion isn't proof. What made you finally call? He sighed. The house. What about it? I couldn't stop thinking about it. He described walking through the living room again after speaking with Grace. There was a framed photograph sitting on the mantel. Richard and I. Taken during our 25th wedding anniversary. I remembered that picture well. We were laughing because the wind had blown Richard's hair into his face, just as the camera clicked. I looked at that photograph, Daniel said quietly, and I asked myself, if this woman chose to leave her home forever, why would she leave behind the happiest memories of her life? He was right. I never would have. If I had truly decided to sell that house, I would have packed every photograph myself, every letter, every family recipe, every fishing trophy Ethan won as a child. Nothing precious would have remained behind. I couldn't shake the feeling, Daniel admitted. So yesterday evening I drove back. You went back? Yes. What for? I wanted to look around one more time. The property was quiet. The lake reflected the evening sky. Nothing had changed. Then he noticed something. The mailbox. It was overflowing. Hospital bills, utility statements, personal letters, everything still addressed to me. If someone had moved permanently, they would have forwarded their mail. Exactly. Instead, it looked like the homeowner expected to return any day. Because I did. Daniel made another discovery. One of the kitchen drawers contained neatly labeled folders, insurance papers, tax receipts, property maintenance records, everything carefully organized. I didn't read anything private. I just noticed how meticulously everything was arranged. I couldn't imagine someone that organized abandoning every important document. I smiled sadly. Richard always joked that I could find a receipt from 15 years ago within 30 seconds. He wasn't wrong. Daniel lowered his voice. I hope you don't think I invaded your privacy. No. You respected my home more than my own son did. Silence settled between us. Finally, he spoke again. I've made a decision. What kind of decision? I'm not touching the property. What do you mean? I've canceled every contractor. You did? I was supposed to replace the dock next week. I canceled. The painter canceled. The landscaping crew canceled. I've instructed everyone not to change a single thing. Emotion caught in my throat. Why would you do that? Because if this sale wasn't legitimate, I want you to come back to exactly the home you left. For the first time since waking from surgery, I cried from gratitude instead of fear. There are moments in life when strangers remind you that kindness still exists. This was one of them. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to. I haven't done anything yet. Yes, you have. You believed me. That wasn't a small thing. Many people wouldn't have. After all, from his perspective, Ethan appeared to be an educated businessman. I was simply an elderly woman recovering from major surgery. People often assume older women become confused, forgetful, unreliable. Daniel hadn't. Instead, he'd listened. There's something else, he said. What? I contacted my attorney this morning. You did? I wanted independent advice. What did they say? They told me not to make any changes until this is resolved. Hope flickered inside me. It wasn't much. But after days of darkness, even a tiny light mattered. I also requested copies of every closing document. I've already sent them to you. Those are electronic copies. I've requested certified originals. Why? I want to examine every signature, every stamp, every notarization, every date, every page. His voice became firmer. If someone committed fraud, I want to know exactly how. Just then another call came through. Grace. I should take this, I said. Of course. We'll talk again tomorrow. Thank you. No, Daniel replied softly. Let's wait until we've earned your thanks. After hanging up, I answered Grace. I've been thinking, she said immediately. So have I. I drove past the lake house this morning. My heart skipped. Was everything okay? Yes. The gentleman was there. Daniel. I assume so. What was he doing? He wasn't moving furniture. He wasn't measuring rooms. He was sitting on your dock. Just sitting. I pictured it. The old weathered dock. Richard had rebuilt twice. The place where we watched sunsets every anniversary. What else? He spent nearly an hour there. Then he left. Without taking anything. Grace hesitated. I think he's waiting for you. Her words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. Waiting. That evening, I finally opened the folder Ethan had left in my hospital room. Insurance forms. Just as he'd claimed. At least most of them. Then I reached the final page. Authorization for financial communication. It would have allowed someone else to speak to banks and institutions on my behalf during recovery. There was nothing illegal about it, but there was something deeply unsettling. He had placed the signature line at the very bottom, without explaining it, without pointing it out, exactly the same way he'd done before my surgery. I slowly closed the folder. Then I remembered something so small I almost dismissed it. 3 days before my operation, Ethan had asked me an unusual question. Mom, do you still sign your checks the same way Dad taught you? I'd laughed. What an odd thing to ask. I was just curious. I guess I do. Richard always told me to make my signature large and clear. Harder for people to copy, he'd say. Back then we laughed about it. Now that memory chilled me. Had Ethan been studying my signature, practicing it, learning its tiny details long before I ever entered the hospital? I didn't know. But one thing had become painfully clear. This wasn't a desperate decision made overnight. Someone had planned this, patiently, carefully, for weeks, perhaps even months. And somewhere inside those carefully prepared documents, I was certain the first real mistake was waiting to be found. 2 days later, I was finally discharged from the hospital. The doctors gave me a long list of instructions. Walk slowly, avoid stress, take my medications on schedule, don't lift anything heavier than 5 pounds. I almost laughed. Avoid stress. If only healing a broken heart were as simple as following a prescription. Grace insisted on driving me home. You shouldn't be alone, she said as she carefully folded my walker into the trunk. I'll be fine. I know you will. She looked at me with the kind of expression only lifelong friends can give. But you shouldn't have to be. The drive to my small house in Petoskey was quiet. Normally, I would have asked Grace to stop at the grocery store or the pharmacy. This time, my thoughts were somewhere else. Daniel's documents, the forged signature, Ethan's lies. Everything felt like pieces of a puzzle scattered across a table. The picture was beginning to appear, but too many pieces were still missing. As soon as we arrived, Grace helped me settle into the living room. I made soup yesterday, she said. It's already in your refrigerator. You didn't have to do that. I know, she smiled. I wanted to. Before leaving, she squeezed my shoulder. Promise me one thing. What? Don't confront Ethan until you know everything. I was thinking the same thing. Good. People who tell one lie usually tell another. I need to know where those lies end. After she left, the house felt unusually quiet. For the first time in years, I found comfort in the silence. No hospital monitors, no footsteps in the hallway, just the ticking of Richard's old grandfather clock. I sat at my dining room table and spread Daniel's documents across the surface. Purchase agreement, property disclosure, closing statement, wire transfer confirmation, power of attorney. That last document immediately caught my attention. Power of attorney. I frowned. I knew I had never intentionally signed one. Carefully, I began reading every page, not skimming, reading, line by line, word by word. By the time I reached the final page, one thing became painfully obvious. The document gave Ethan authority to complete real estate transactions on my behalf. If it were legitimate, he would have had the legal right to sell the lake house. But something bothered me. The date. I picked up my calendar. The power of attorney had supposedly been signed on April 14th. I stared at the number. April 14th. That was impossible. I opened another folder containing my medical records. There it was. April 14th. I had spent the entire afternoon at Munson Medical Center undergoing cardiac imaging. The appointment had lasted nearly 6 hours. Richard had always taught me to keep every receipt and every appointment card. For the first time in my life, that habit might save me. I immediately called Daniel. I think I found something. What is it? The power of attorney. Yes. The date doesn't make sense. He listened carefully while I explained where I had been that day. So you couldn't have signed it at the office? No. I wasn't anywhere near a closing attorney. Daniel was silent for several seconds. Then he said, I've been looking into something too. What? The notary. What about the notary? I searched her business. And she retired almost 8 months ago. I blinked. What? The stamp on your documents belongs to a woman named Patricia Monroe. So, she hasn't worked since last year. A cold chill ran through me. Then who notarized those papers? I don't know. But someone used her seal. The fraud suddenly felt much larger. This wasn't just Ethan signing my name. Someone else had helped. Someone with access to official documents. Someone willing to risk a felony. "We need a lawyer," Daniel said firmly. "I know. I've already spoken to someone." "You have?" "Her name is Rebecca Collins. She's one of the best real estate attorneys in northern Michigan. I'd like to pay for the consultation." "No. I'm the buyer. I have some responsibility. You were deceived too." "That may be true. But I still want to help." I hesitated. After everything that had happened, accepting help felt strangely difficult. Richard used to say that pride sometimes disguises itself as independence. Maybe he had been right. "Thank you," I finally whispered. "We'll meet her together." The consultation was scheduled for 2 days later. That evening, another surprise arrived. Ethan came to visit. He carried grocery bags this time. "I brought fresh fruit." "That's thoughtful." "And your prescriptions." He walked into the kitchen as though nothing had changed, as though he hadn't secretly sold the most precious place in my life. "You should really stay off your feet," he said. "I've got everything under control." I watched him unpack groceries. His movements were familiar, confident, comfortable. This house had always been his second home. Did he ever feel guilty, or had he convinced himself that everything he'd done was justified? "I've been thinking," I said carefully. "About what?" "The lake house." His shoulders stiffened almost imperceptibly. "What about it?" "I miss it." He kept placing food into the refrigerator. "You'll get back there eventually." "Will I?" He finally turned toward me. "What does that mean?" "I've had a lot of time to think in the hospital." "So have I." "I realize life changes quickly." He nodded. "It does. I also realize people sometimes make important decisions while we're vulnerable." His expression hardened for only a fraction of a second. Then it disappeared. "What are you trying to say?" "I don't know yet." That answer unsettled him more than any accusation could have. He forced a laugh. "You sound mysterious." "I suppose I do." He changed the subject almost immediately. "Vanessa wanted to come." "But the kids have soccer practice." I nodded politely. Another lie. Vanessa hadn't called me once since surgery. Not once. When Ethan prepared to leave, he stopped at the front door. "Mom." "Yes." "If anyone contacts you about the lake house." My heartbeat quickened. "They're probably just confused." I kept my face perfectly calm. "What do you mean? Paperwork gets messy sometimes." "I wouldn't worry about it." There it was. Not a confession. Not even an explanation. Just an attempt to control the narrative before I could learn the truth. I smiled gently. "I won't." After he drove away, I wrote every word down in a notebook. Richard had always believed memories become evidence the moment they're written. The next morning, Daniel called again. "I have another update." "What happened?" "I drove past the county recorder's office. And I requested public copies of the filing." "Were they available?" "Yes." His voice became quieter. "Mrs. Parker." "What?" "The property wasn't just sold." "What do you mean?" "The sale closed." He paused. "Less than 48 hours after the paperwork was filed." I frowned. "Is that unusual?" "Very. Especially for waterfront property." "Everything happened incredibly fast." "Too fast. The survey, the photographer, the inspection, the forged signatures, the rushed closing, the suspicious notary." Each discovery pointed toward the same conclusion. This hadn't been a desperate decision made at the last minute. It had been a carefully organized plan, and whoever helped Ethan had expected one thing above all else: that an elderly woman recovering from heart surgery would never have the strength, or the determination, to fight back. They were about to discover how badly they had underestimated me. Rebecca Collins' office overlooked Little Traverse Bay. It wasn't flashy. There were no marble floors or expensive artwork, just shelves lined with thick legal books, framed certificates, and a coffee maker that looked older than my grandson. For some reason, that made me trust her immediately. She greeted Daniel and me with a firm handshake. "Mrs. Parker," she said gently, "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." "So am I." She motioned for us to sit. I've reviewed the documents Daniel emailed yesterday. You already have? I stayed late. She smiled faintly. Something about this case kept bothering me. She spread several copies across the conference table, colored sticky notes marked different pages. I'd like to begin with the signatures. My stomach tightened. Rebecca slid 2 sheets toward me. One contained the signature from the closing documents. The other was from my driver's license renewal 3 years earlier. Look closely. At first they appeared almost identical. Then Rebecca pointed with her pen. See the capital M. I leaned closer. In your genuine signature, she explained, the second stroke always curves slightly inward. She placed another authentic signature beside it. Again, the same curve, then another, and another. Every genuine signature shared that tiny habit. The forged one did not. It goes straight down, I whispered. Exactly. Rebecca nodded. Most people never notice the microscopic habits in their own handwriting. But those habits are remarkably consistent. She reached for a magnifying glass. Now look at the letter P. I did. In every authentic signature, you lift your pen before beginning the loop. How can you tell? The pressure changes. She smiled. The ink leaves tiny clues. She turned to Daniel. Whoever copied Mrs. Parker's signature was talented. But they copied the appearance. They couldn't copy the unconscious movements. A strange mixture of relief and sadness washed over me. Relief because someone else finally saw what I had known from the beginning. Sadness because my own son had apparently studied my handwriting closely enough for this conversation to be necessary. Rebecca continued. I'd like to bring in a forensic document examiner. Would that help? It would help tremendously. She paused. But honestly, I don't think the signature will be the strongest part of your case. That surprised me. It won't. No. She reached for another document. The power of attorney. Daniel leaned forward. The date? Not only the date. Rebecca opened a notebook filled with handwritten observations. I checked the registration number on the notary seal. And the commission expired last October. I stared at her. So it couldn't have been used legally. Correct. The document claims it was notarized 6 months after the commission had already expired. Daniel looked stunned. So someone copied an old seal. Possibly. Or someone used a digital image. She folded her hands. Either way, it's a serious problem. Hope grew a little stronger. Rebecca wasn't finished. There are more inconsistencies. She pointed to the witness section. There should be 2 witness signatures. There is only one. I looked carefully. She was right. How had I missed that? The address of the notary office is also outdated. She turned another page. And the formatting doesn't match the templates that office has used during the last 3 years. Daniel slowly shook his head. So the entire document may be fabricated. The room fell silent. Rebecca finally looked directly at me. I need to ask you something. Anything. Did you ever knowingly sign a power of attorney giving Ethan authority to sell real estate? No. Not ever. Never. What about during your hospital preparation? I signed medical paperwork, insurance forms. But no one explained a power of attorney. She made another note. Good. Why good? Because if someone intentionally mixed unrelated documents into a stack requiring signatures, that suggests deception. I remembered the folders Ethan had handed me before surgery, the way he hurried through them, the way he tapped each signature line without giving me time to read. My chest tightened. I trusted him. Rebecca's voice softened. Fraud within families almost always depends on trust. Daniel quietly added, and that's what makes it so devastating. Rebecca nodded. I'd also like permission to investigate Ethan's financial situation. I hesitated. My son's finances. People usually don't commit complex fraud without significant pressure. What kind of pressure? Debt, lawsuits, failed investments, tax problems. There is almost always a motive. I slowly nodded. If it helps uncover the truth, you have my permission. She thanked me. Then she asked another question. Mrs. Parker, if we prove your son committed fraud, what outcome do you want? The question caught me completely off guard. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What did I want? Justice, certainly. My house back. Absolutely. My son in prison. The thought made me physically ill. Rebecca seemed to understand my silence. You don't have to answer today. I honestly don't know. I believe you. After the meeting ended, Daniel walked me to my car. I hope today gave you some peace. It gave me something. What? Proof that I'm not imagining this. He smiled. You're definitely not. Before we left, Rebecca stepped outside carrying another folder. I almost forgot. She handed it to me. I pulled publicly available financial records. So quickly. I know where to look. Inside were several printed pages, business registrations, property liens, corporate filings. One page immediately caught Rebecca's attention. Ethan owns part of an investment company. I knew that. What you may not know, she tapped a highlighted paragraph, is that the company borrowed a substantial amount of money last year. How much? She quietly named the figure. I felt dizzy. It was more money than Richard and I had earned in decades. Daniel frowned. That's a major commercial loan, Rebecca nodded. And according to these filings, the company has missed multiple payment deadlines. I looked at her in disbelief. Ethan never mentioned any of this. I'm sure he didn't. She flipped another page. There are additional personal guarantees. What does that mean? It means if the business can't pay, he becomes personally responsible. Daniel exhaled slowly. So he wasn't just under pressure. He was drowning. Rebecca didn't disagree. There may be even more. These are only public records. As Grace drove me home that afternoon, neither of us spoke much. My mind kept replaying one sentence. He was drowning. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness, not yet, pity. I could almost picture Ethan lying awake at night staring at unpaid bills, convincing himself there was only one way out. But pity didn't erase what he had done. It didn't restore my signature. It didn't return my home. It didn't explain why he had looked into my eyes while I recovered from heart surgery and calmly told me everything was fine. That evening, Rebecca called again. I have one more update. You work incredibly fast, she laughed softly. I had a feeling I should. What did you find? I spoke with the bank handling the closing funds. And there was an unusual transfer. My heartbeat quickened. What kind? The proceeds from the sale didn't remain in Ethan's account. They didn't. No. They were transferred almost immediately. To where? Rebecca hesitated. I don't know yet. The receiving account belongs to another financial institution. But here's the important part. It happened less than 3 hours after closing. Daniel, who had been listening on speakerphone, quietly said, "Someone was in a hurry." Rebecca answered with a single sentence that echoed in my mind long after the call ended. No, Daniel. They weren't just in a hurry. They were afraid the money wouldn't stay theirs for very long. As I looked out my living room window toward the darkening sky, I realized this story had become much bigger than a forged signature. Someone had carefully built an entire plan around my surgery. And somewhere beyond Ethan's desperate decisions, there was still another piece of the puzzle waiting to be uncovered. 3 mornings later, Daniel called before sunrise. I hope I didn't wake you. You didn't. The truth is, I hadn't been sleeping much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Richard standing on the dock, smiling the way he always had after finishing another project around the lake house. Then I would remember that on paper, at least, it no longer belonged to me. I was wondering if you'd be up for a drive today, Daniel asked. A drive. I think it's time you came back. I knew immediately what he meant. The lake house. For a moment I couldn't answer. Part of me wanted to go more than anything. Another part was terrified. What if it no longer felt like home? What if seeing someone else's truck in the driveway finally made everything real? Daniel didn't rush me. If it's too soon, I understand. No. I took a slow breath. It's time. Grace insisted on coming. She refused to let me make the trip alone, especially so soon after surgery. "You may be strong," she said while helping me into her SUV, "but you're still healing." She wasn't talking only about my heart. The drive north felt strangely familiar. The roads twisted through forests that were beginning to glow with early autumn colors. Golden maples, bright red oaks, dark green pines. Richard used to say Michigan saved its finest beauty for people patient enough to notice. I found myself looking for places we had stopped over the years. The little diner where Ethan always ordered pancakes bigger than his plate. The roadside fruit stand where Richard insisted peaches tasted sweeter after a long drive. The gas station where our grandchildren begged for ice cream every summer. Every mile carried another memory. Finally, Grace reached over and gently squeezed my hand. "We're almost there." My heart began beating faster, not from fear, from anticipation. As we turned onto the familiar gravel road, I noticed something unexpected. The wildflowers along the entrance had been watered. Richard had planted those flowers years ago. I hadn't been there in weeks. Someone had cared for them. We rounded the final curve. There it was, the lake house, exactly where it had always stood. The cream-colored siding reflected the morning sunlight. The porch swing moved gently in the breeze. The old American flag near the dock fluttered softly above the water. I couldn't breathe for a moment. "It looks—" I stopped speaking. "It looks like home," Grace finished quietly. Daniel's pickup truck was already parked beside the garage. He stepped onto the porch as we pulled into the driveway. He didn't wave. He didn't smile broadly. Instead, he simply waited, as though he understood this moment belonged to me. Grace helped me out of the SUV. I stood there without moving. Every instinct told me to run toward the house. Instead, I simply stared. The flower boxes beneath the windows were still full. The porch had been swept. Even the bird feeder near the maple tree had fresh seed. Daniel walked toward us. "I wasn't sure how much you wanted changed. So, I changed nothing." He handed me a small ring of keys. "I believe these are yours." My fingers trembled as I accepted them. "I thought I never replaced the locks." "You still have every key you've ever had." A tear rolled down my cheek. "Thank you." He smiled gently. "It never felt like my place." Slowly I climbed the 3 porch steps. Each one creaked exactly the way I remembered. Richard always promised to fix that second step. Then he would laugh and say, "If I fix it, how will I know someone's coming?" I reached the front door. The brass handle felt cool beneath my hand. For several seconds I simply stood there. Grace whispered behind me, "Go on." I unlocked the door. The familiar scent wrapped around me immediately. Old pine wood, fresh coffee, a faint trace of lavender from the dried flowers I always kept in the kitchen. Home. Not the smell of furniture, not paint, not money. Home. I walked inside slowly. Nothing had moved. Richard's fishing hat still hung beside the door. The blue quilt my mother stitched still rested across the sofa. The family photographs remained on the mantel. Even my reading glasses still sat beside the armchair where I had left them before surgery. I reached down and picked them up. For some reason, that simple act nearly broke me. Daniel remained near the doorway. "I wasn't sure if I should pack your belongings." "I'm glad you didn't." It didn't seem right. It wasn't. I wandered into the kitchen. There, sitting on the counter, was a ceramic cookie jar shaped like a lighthouse. Ethan had painted it for me in 3rd grade. The colors had never been perfect. One side leaned slightly because he'd accidentally pushed too hard while molding the clay. I ran my fingers across it. "He made this." Daniel nodded. I wondered about that. He was 9. "It's beautiful. It always has been." Next, I walked toward the living room windows overlooking the lake. The water sparkled beneath the morning sun exactly as it had thousands of mornings before. The dock stretched quietly into the blue. A pair of loons drifted across the surface. Nothing in nature seemed to care about contracts, or signatures, or betrayal. The lake simply remained the lake. Grace disappeared into the kitchen. A few moments later, I heard the familiar sound of a kettle filling with water. Without asking, without speaking, She was making coffee, exactly the way she always had whenever she visited. Daniel looked around the room. I hope you don't mind. What? I sat in Richard's chair once. I smiled faintly. I'm sure he wouldn't mind. I wanted to understand why this place mattered so much. And I think I understand now. He walked toward the fireplace. My wife and I had a cabin years ago. I turned toward him. You did? Nothing as beautiful as this. But we raised our children there. After Eleanor died, he looked out the window. I sold it. Were you ready? I told myself I was. Were you? No. His answer came without hesitation. I regretted it almost immediately. He looked back at me. I think grief convinces us we're making practical decisions. But grief rarely thinks practically. For the first time, I truly understood something about Daniel. He wasn't helping me because he pitied me. He was helping because he recognized his own loss inside mine. Grace returned carrying 3 steaming mugs. She placed one beside me, another beside Daniel. Then she quietly disappeared onto the porch, giving us privacy. Daniel reached into his jacket. I brought something. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a folded inventory. I made a list of every item in the house. I looked at him confused. Why? So no one can ever claim something disappeared while the property was under my responsibility. I stared at the pages. Every room, every major piece of furniture, even Richard's old tackle box. Everything had been carefully documented. You did all this. I wanted to protect your memories. No one had ever spoken those words to me before. Protect your memories. Most people wanted to protect money, assets, investments. Daniel understood that memories could be stolen just as easily. We spent nearly 2 hours walking through the house together. I showed him the pencil marks on the pantry wall where we measured Ethan's height every birthday. The tiny scratch in the dining room floor where Richard accidentally dropped his toolbox. The initials carved beneath the dock that Ethan had hidden when he was 12. Dad plus me. Daniel listened more than he talked. He treated every story as though it mattered. Eventually we stepped outside and walked toward the dock. The boards creaked softly beneath our feet. Halfway to the end I stopped. The wind carried the scent of fresh water and pine needles, exactly as it always had. I thought coming here would hurt, I admitted. Does it? Yes. I smiled through tears, but not in the way I expected. Daniel looked across the lake. What do you mean? I realized something. What? They may have forged my signature. I looked back toward the house Richard had built with his own hands. They may even have stolen the deed. But they never truly owned this place. He nodded. Because a home isn't transferred with paperwork. It's transferred with love. For the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, I believed I might actually get my life back. But as hopeful as that morning felt, neither Daniel nor I knew that someone else had just pulled into the end of the gravel road. And that person had no intention of letting me reclaim my home without a fight. I heard the tires before I saw the vehicle. Gravel crunched at the end of the long driveway. Daniel turned toward the road first. Grace stepped out from the porch, shielding her eyes from the afternoon sun. I didn't have to guess who it was. A black SUV slowly rolled toward the house. When it stopped, Ethan climbed out. For a few seconds, none of us moved. He hadn't expected to find me there. I could see it in his face. His eyes widened ever so slightly before he forced a smile. Mom. His voice sounded almost cheerful. I heard you were feeling stronger. I am. He glanced toward Daniel, then toward Grace. Finally, his eyes settled on the keys in my hand. You came all the way out here. I wanted to see my home. His jaw tightened. Mom! He looked around uneasily. This probably isn't the best time. For what? For all of this. Daniel quietly took a step back. He wasn't trying to protect himself. He was giving us space. This was a conversation between a mother and her son. I walked slowly toward Ethan. My chest still ached from surgery, but I refused to let him see weakness. You told me everything here was exactly the way I left it. It is. You told me not to worry. I meant that. You told me no one would contact me. His expression changed. What are you talking about? I looked directly into his eyes. I spoke with Daniel. Silence. Not the peaceful silence of the lake, the suffocating kind. Ethan looked at Daniel. Daniel met his gaze calmly. I called her. Ethan's face hardened. You had no right, Daniel answered evenly. I believed she deserved to know someone had purchased her home while she was recovering from heart surgery. You don't understand the situation. I understand enough. This is between my mother and me. Daniel nodded. It always was. Unfortunately, you involved me when you sold me the property. For a moment, I thought Ethan might lose his temper. Instead, he took a deep breath. Mom, can we talk privately? Grace looked at me. The decision was mine. I nodded. All right. We walked toward the end of the dock. The same dock where Ethan had learned to fish, where Richard had taught him how to tie knots, where we'd celebrated birthdays and graduations. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. For several moments, Ethan stared across the lake. Finally, he spoke. I never wanted you to find out like this. I waited. I was going to explain everything. When he rubbed both hands across his face. After you recovered. After the sale was finished. He didn't answer. After the money was gone. Still nothing. Ethan. I kept my voice calm. Look at me. He slowly lifted his eyes. They say you sold this house. He nodded once. I need to hear it from you. Another long silence. Then barely above a whisper. I did. Hearing the words spoken aloud hurt more than I expected. Until then, part of me had continued hoping there had been some misunderstanding. There wasn't. You forged my signature. You lied to me. I know. You lied to Daniel. I know. You lied to Grace. I know. His shoulders sagged lower with every sentence. Then unexpectedly he looked at me with frustration instead of shame. I didn't do it because I hate you. I never said you did. I did it because I was trying to save my family. I looked at him quietly. My family. My business. My children. I was drowning. So I've heard. He looked surprised. You know, I know more than you think. He exhaled heavily. You don't understand how bad it became. Then help me understand. He leaned against the railing. It started 2 years ago. My partners wanted to develop waterfront properties. We borrowed money. A lot of money. The market changed. Interest rates went up. Projects stalled. Investors pulled out. He laughed bitterly. Everything that could go wrong did. Why didn't you tell me? I was embarrassed. You've always been proud of me. I didn't want you to see me fail. I listened without interrupting. The bank kept calling. There were lawsuits. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. Every day I felt like I was losing everything. And somehow, you decided to take mine. His eyes filled with tears. I convinced myself it was temporary. I frowned. Temporary. I thought I could buy it back. When, after I fixed everything, you sold your mother's home, without her permission, believing someday you'd quietly return it. He nodded weakly. I know how crazy that sounds. No. It sounds desperate. His voice cracked. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was surviving. I looked across the lake. A light breeze rippled the water. Richard used to tell Ethan something whenever he panicked during fishing trips. When you're scared, slow down. Fast decisions usually become slow regrets. I wondered if Ethan remembered. You know what hurts the most? I asked quietly. He shook his head. It isn't the house. It isn't even the forged signature. He looked confused. It's that you watched them wheel me into heart surgery, kissed my forehead, told me not to worry, and then sold the place your father built with his own hands. His face collapsed. I know. No. I shook my head gently. I don't think you do. He covered his eyes. I hated myself every minute. Then why didn't you stop? I couldn't. Because once I started, I had to finish. There it was. The terrible truth about lies. The first one always demands another, then another, until eventually the liar becomes trapped inside a story they no longer control. Ethan. Yes. Did Vanessa know? He hesitated. She knew we needed the money. Did she know you forged my signature? He didn't answer immediately. Answer me. She knew I was handling the paperwork. That wasn't an answer. It was avoidance. I noticed. So did he. He lowered his head. She suspected. The words barely escaped his mouth. I never showed her everything. But she didn't ask many questions. I closed my eyes. Another disappointment. Another crack in the family I thought I knew. Finally, I asked the one question that had been living inside me since Daniel first called. Did you ever stop, even once, and think about me? He looked up immediately. Every day. No, I shook my head. I didn't ask whether you felt guilty. I asked whether you thought about protecting me. He stared at me. I continued. When the doctors wheeled me into surgery, I was frightened. But I wasn't afraid because I trusted you. I believed my son was standing guard over everything your father and I built. Tears streamed down his face now. I know. And instead, you became the one person I needed protection from. Those words seemed to break something inside him. He sat down heavily on the edge of the dock. His shoulders shook. For the first time since this nightmare began. He wasn't defending himself. He wasn't explaining. He wasn't justifying. He was crying. Not like a businessman. Not like a husband. Not even like a father. He cried like the little boy who once believed his father could fix anything. But Richard wasn't here anymore. Only I was. And despite everything, seeing my son collapse under the weight of his own choices still broke my heart. Behind us, Daniel and Grace remained quietly on the porch, giving us distance. Neither of them could hear our words, but they could see our silence. After several minutes, Ethan wiped his eyes. There are things you still don't know. I looked at him carefully. What things? He took a slow, trembling breath. The house. It wasn't the only thing I almost lost. He looked toward the gravel road where his SUV sat waiting, then back at me. And the people I owed money to weren't willing to wait. The people I owed money to weren't willing to wait. Those words stayed with me during the entire drive home. Grace drove in silence, occasionally glancing at me to make sure I was comfortable. Daniel followed behind us in his pickup until we reached the highway, then gave a small wave before taking the exit toward his own town. None of us spoke about what had happened on the dock. There was nothing left to say. Ethan had admitted selling the house. He had admitted lying, but his confession hadn't answered the most important question. How had he managed to convince everyone that the transaction was legitimate? The following morning, Rebecca called. I think we found someone you need to meet. Who? A former employee from the title office that handled your closing. My pulse quickened. What happened? She contacted me yesterday evening. Why now? She saw a notice requesting documents related to your property. Rebecca paused. She said something about your case never felt right. An hour later, Daniel picked me up. When we arrived at Rebecca's office, a woman in her early 60s was already waiting. She stood as I entered. You must be Mrs. Parker. I am. My name is Linda Foster. She looked genuinely nervous. I retired 6 months ago. Rebecca motioned for everyone to sit. Linda worked as an administrative coordinator at Great Lakes Title Services, the same office that processed your property sale. Linda folded her hands tightly together. I've gone over this in my head 100 times. I should have spoken sooner. I leaned forward. What did you see? She took a deep breath. The closing happened unusually fast. How fast? The file arrived on a Monday. It was scheduled to close Wednesday morning. Rebecca nodded. That's much faster than normal. Especially for waterfront property. Linda continued. Most transactions like yours take weeks. Buyer's inspections, final document reviews, title corrections. There are usually delays. This one, she shook her head, was treated like an emergency. Daniel frowned. Who requested that? Your son. My stomach tightened. He called repeatedly, asking whether everything was finished, asking whether anything else was needed, asking if we could move the closing sooner. Rebecca asked quietly, Did he seem nervous? Linda didn't hesitate. Very. He kept saying his mother needed everything completed before a medical procedure. I closed my eyes. He had used my surgery to rush the sale. I believed him, Linda said softly. I thought I was helping a family during a difficult time. No one blames you, I replied. She nodded gratefully before continuing. There was another thing. What? The power of attorney. The room became completely still. I remember asking where the original document was, and Mr. Parker said it had already been scanned and securely archived. Rebecca looked up immediately. That's not standard procedure. I know. I asked whether we should verify it. What did he say? Linda swallowed. He smiled. Then she repeated Ethan's exact words. My mother's recovering from serious heart problems. Let's not put her through unnecessary stress. Hearing those words hurt more than I expected. He had used concern for my health as a shield. Rebecca made another note. What happened after that? Linda looked embarrassed. Our office manager approved moving forward. Was the office manager present today? No. He retired last month. Rebecca didn't seem discouraged. Did anything else happen during closing? Linda nodded slowly. There was one strange moment. Everyone leaned in. The buyer, she looked toward Daniel, asked whether he would be meeting the seller. Daniel nodded. I remember asking that. What answer were you given? Rebecca asked. Linda sighed. Mr. Parker said his mother wasn't feeling well enough to attend. That part was believable. But then, she hesitated again. I offered to arrange a remote video confirmation. Daniel looked surprised. You never told me that. I couldn't. Because your son immediately refused. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. What reason did he give? He said his mother hated technology. A sad smile crossed my face. I use video calls with my grandchildren every Sunday. Linda looked devastated. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, she continued. He insisted the power of attorney made everything unnecessary. Rebecca folded her arms. That decision may have violated internal policy. Linda nodded. I've brought copies. She opened a folder and slid several printed pages across the table. These are our closing procedures. Rebecca read silently for several moments. Then she smiled for the first time that day. This helps. A great deal. I looked at her. Why? Because according to these procedures, she tapped the page. When the seller is absent under a power of attorney, additional verification is recommended. They skipped it. They skipped multiple safeguards. Daniel asked. Does that mean the title company is responsible? Rebecca answered carefully. It means mistakes were made. But first, we need to determine whether those mistakes resulted from negligence or intentional deception. Linda cleared her throat. There's something else. Rebecca looked up. What is it? The security cameras. What about them? Linda's voice grew steadier. Our office records every closing. My heart skipped. Every closing. Yes. For security purposes. Daniel leaned forward. The cameras were running that day. They always are. Rebecca immediately asked the question everyone was thinking. Do the recordings still exist? I wasn't sure. So I called an old coworker. And they hadn't been deleted yet. Silence filled the room. Video. Actual video. Not memories. Not opinions. Not assumptions. Evidence. Rebecca stood so quickly that her chair rolled backward. When can we obtain them? Linda smiled faintly. I already requested that they be preserved. I stared at her. You did all that? For someone you've never met. She looked directly at me. My mother was 83 when she passed away. If anyone had treated her this way, I would have prayed that somebody spoke up. Emotion caught in my throat. Thank you. Rebecca immediately began making phone calls. Within 20 minutes, she ended the last one and looked at us. The title company has agreed to preserve all recordings. They'll also provide visitor logs. Daniel asked, "What kind of visitor logs?" "Everyone entering the office signs in." She paused. "If anyone accompanied Ethan, we may know." Just then her phone buzzed again. She frowned while reading the message. "What is it?" I asked. Rebecca slowly looked up. The bank responded. "The wire transfer." "Yes." She turned the screen toward us. "The funds were transferred from Ethan's account into an escrow account." I frowned. "Escrow? So he didn't spend the money?" "Apparently not." Daniel looked confused. "Why would someone in desperate financial trouble place the money into escrow?" Rebecca answered quietly. "That's exactly what I intend to find out." She closed the file. "But first," she looked at me with calm confidence, "I believe we're finally reaching the point where the facts are stronger than the lies." As Daniel drove me home that afternoon, I watched the shoreline disappear behind us. For weeks I had felt as though I were chasing shadows. Now those shadows were beginning to take shape. A witness had stepped forward. Office procedures had been uncovered. Security footage had been preserved. The truth was no longer hiding. It was waiting. And somewhere inside those recordings, I had a feeling there was one moment, one small mistake, that would finally expose exactly how my son had managed to steal the house his own father had built. The security footage arrived 3 days later. Rebecca had arranged for all of us to meet in a private conference room at her office. When I walked in, Daniel was already there with 2 cups of coffee waiting on the table. "You remembered," he smiled. "You take yours with 1 cream." "I've had enough practice." I managed a small smile. It amazed me how much comfort could come from someone who had been a complete stranger only a few weeks earlier. Rebecca entered carrying a laptop and a thick binder. "We have everything." She connected the laptop to a large monitor mounted on the wall. "The title company preserved every recording from the day of closing." She paused before pressing play. "I want to prepare you. You may hear things that are difficult." I nodded. "I'm ready." The video began. The timestamp showed 9:14 a.m. Ethan entered the title office carrying a leather portfolio. He looked exactly as he always did, well-dressed, confident, composed. Nothing about his appearance suggested panic or desperation. A receptionist greeted him warmly. He smiled back. He looked normal. That somehow made everything worse. Rebecca fast-forwarded several minutes. Daniel appeared on screen. He shook Ethan's hand. The 2 men exchanged polite conversation before sitting at opposite ends of the closing table. I watched Daniel's face carefully. There was no deception there. I truly believed he was participating in a legitimate real estate transaction. "I remember asking about you," Daniel said quietly. Rebecca nodded. "Watch." On the recording, Daniel asked a question. Although the camera had no audio, the office microphone captured enough to hear the conversation. "Will your mother be joining us?" Ethan smiled sympathetically. "I wish she could. She's recovering from serious heart problems." Daniel frowned. "I hope she's all right." "We're praying for a full recovery." I closed my eyes. He had used my illness so naturally, so effortlessly. Rebecca let the recording continue. An employee placed several documents in front of Ethan. He signed where instructed. Everything appeared routine. Then something caught Rebecca's attention. "Here." She paused the video. "Look closely." She zoomed in on the conference table. There beside Ethan's portfolio lay another folder. Rebecca enlarged the image again. A logo became visible. "Great Lakes Investment Group." Daniel frowned. "That's not part of my purchase." "No," Rebecca agreed. "It isn't." She resumed playback. About 20 minutes later, Ethan excused himself from the room. The hallway camera picked him up moments afterward. Instead of walking toward the restroom, he made a phone call. The audio was faint but understandable. "It's almost done." A pause. "Yes." The money should move today. Another pause. No, she doesn't know anything. Those words echoed through the silent room. She doesn't know anything. I looked away from the screen. Not because I couldn't bear to watch, because I suddenly realized how carefully every lie had been rehearsed. Rebecca continued playing the recording. Ethan returned to the conference room. The closing finished. Daniel shook his hand. The two men left separately. That's all, I asked. Not quite. Rebecca switched to footage from the lobby. 5 minutes after Daniel walked out, a woman entered the building. Vanessa. I stared at the screen. She wasn't there during the closing. She hadn't signed anything. She simply walked in after Daniel had already left. Ethan met her near the entrance. The microphone caught only fragments. Finished. Wire. Finally. She smiled. Then she hugged him. Not the hug of two frightened people, the hug of people celebrating. I felt my chest tighten. Ethan had told me Vanessa barely knew anything. The recording suggested otherwise. Rebecca stopped the video. No conclusions yet. But this raises questions. Daniel nodded slowly. It certainly does. Before anyone could speak, Rebecca opened the binder. I've also received the visitor log. She turned several pages. There were only 4 non-employees present that morning. She pointed one by one. Daniel Brooks, Ethan Parker, Vanessa Parker. Then she stopped. And one more name. I leaned forward. Who? Mark Ellison. I don't know that name. Neither did I. Rebecca slid another sheet across the table. So I looked him up. She had already printed his professional profile. Mark Ellison, independent financial consultant, specialized in debt restructuring and commercial financing. Daniel frowned. Why would someone like that attend a real estate closing? That's exactly what I asked. Rebecca folded her hands. So I called. You called him? Yes. And he refused to discuss your case. But, she smiled slightly, he confirmed he knew Ethan. Another piece of the puzzle, not proof, but another connection. Rebecca wasn't finished. I also completed a financial timeline. She laid several charts across the table. Ethan's company missed its first major payment 8 months ago. Then another. And another. The creditors became increasingly aggressive. Daniel studied the documents. This explains the pressure. It explains the motive, Rebecca corrected. It does not excuse the conduct. I appreciated the distinction. For days I had struggled with conflicting emotions. I could understand my son's fear. I could even understand desperation. But understanding wasn't the same as acceptance. Rebecca looked directly at me. Mrs. Parker, there's one final matter. What is it? The escrow account. The bank finally identified its purpose. I held my breath. The money wasn't transferred to a personal account. It wasn't, no. It was placed into an attorney-managed escrow account connected to Ethan's business creditors. Daniel looked confused. So he never actually received the proceeds? Rebecca nodded. Correct. The funds were effectively frozen while several creditors negotiated repayment. That explained why the money had moved so quickly, not because Ethan wanted to hide it, because he was trying to stop his business from collapsing. For a brief moment, I imagined the fear he must have felt. Watching years of work disappear, trying to save his employees, trying to protect his children. Then another memory surfaced. Me lying in a hospital bed after open-heart surgery, believing my son was protecting me. The sympathy faded. Rebecca closed the binder. Based on everything we now have, the forged signature, the defective power of attorney, the expired notary commission, the missing verification, the witness testimony, the security recordings. I believe we have a very strong civil case. Daniel asked quietly. What happens next? Rebecca answered without hesitation. I file suit. Against Ethan. Against everyone involved in the transaction who may bear legal responsibility. Silence filled the room. The moment had finally arrived. Weeks ago, this had been a nightmare I couldn't even understand. Now it was becoming a legal battle. Rebecca turned toward me. I need your authorization. My hand rested on the folder in front of me. For 67 years, every important signature I'd ever written had built something. A marriage, a mortgage, a teaching career, a family. This signature would begin something entirely different. It would begin holding my own son accountable. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled, not from uncertainty, from grief. Then slowly and deliberately, I signed my real name. The same name Richard had loved. The same signature Ethan had tried to imitate. Only this time, it wasn't being used to surrender my home. It was being used to fight for it. As Rebecca gathered the papers, my phone vibrated. The caller ID read Ethan. I looked at the screen without answering. A second later, a voicemail notification appeared. I pressed play. His voice sounded exhausted. Mom, I just got served. I know you have every reason to hate me. But before this goes any further, there's something about the closing that I never told anyone. I listened to Ethan's voicemail 3 times before I called Rebecca. Don't respond yet, she said after hearing the recording. Why? Because whatever he wants to tell you may become important evidence. So I should ignore him. For now. Her voice remained calm and measured. If Ethan truly wants to cooperate, he can do it through proper legal channels. The hearing was scheduled only 12 days later. Rebecca explained that this would not be a dramatic criminal trial like people saw on television. It was a civil proceeding to determine whether the sale of my lake house was legally valid and whether the deed should be set aside. Even so, it felt like the longest 12 days of my life. I spent most mornings sitting on my front porch with a blanket around my shoulders, trying to recover physically while preparing myself emotionally. Grace visited almost every afternoon. Sometimes we talked about the lawsuit. Sometimes we deliberately avoided it. Instead, we'd remember Richard. Or laugh about Ethan as a little boy who once insisted he could build a treehouse using only duct tape and a hammer. Those memories reminded me of someone I still loved, even if I no longer recognized the man he had become. 2 days before the hearing, Rebecca called. I've received Ethan's response. What does it say? He admits selling the property. I expected that. He also admits you never personally attended the closing. I expected that too. But, she paused, he is no longer claiming you signed the closing documents in his presence. I sat upright. What is he claiming now? That he believed this power of attorney gave him authority. I frowned. But he knows that document isn't valid. Exactly. And that's why his position has changed. Rebecca explained that Ethan's attorney was no longer defending the authenticity of my signature. Instead, they were attempting to argue that Ethan had acted under a mistaken belief that the paperwork was legally sufficient. Does that help us? It helps tremendously. Why? Because it abandons the strongest part of his original story. For the first time since this nightmare began, I sensed that the truth was beginning to corner every lie. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and gray. The county courthouse stood on a hill overlooking the harbor. Its stone steps seemed steeper than I remembered. Daniel offered me his arm. Take your time. I'm not as fragile as I look. I know. I just don't want you climbing these steps alone. Inside the courtroom felt surprisingly quiet. No television cameras, no crowded gallery, just attorneys, court staff, and a handful of people whose lives had somehow become connected through one terrible decision. I saw Ethan before he saw me. He looked older. His suit still fit perfectly, but it hung differently on him. The confidence I had always associated with my son was gone. Vanessa sat beside him. She stared at the floor. She never looked in my direction. Daniel quietly took a seat behind Rebecca. I'll testify whenever they need me. Thank you. I promised I'd see this through. The judge entered. Everyone stood. After brief introductions, Rebecca presented our case. She spoke calmly, methodically. She never raised her voice. This case is not about a simple family disagreement, she began. It concerns whether a home was transferred through valid legal authority. She presented the timeline. My hospitalization, the rushed closing, the expired notary commission, the defective power of attorney, the missing verification procedures. Then she introduced the forensic handwriting report. The expert explained the differences between my authentic signatures and the one used during the sale. He enlarged both signatures on a courtroom monitor, pointing out pen pressure, stroke direction spacing, and natural writing habits. In my professional opinion, he concluded, the questioned signature was not written by Mrs. Parker. Those words echoed through the courtroom. Not written by Mrs. Parker. Rebecca thanked him and sat down. Ethan's attorney stood next. He did not challenge the handwriting expert. Instead, he argued that Ethan had believed he possessed authority through the power of attorney. Rebecca immediately rose. Your Honor, the evidence will show that the power of attorney itself was legally defective. She presented the expired notary commission, the incorrect office address, the missing witness. The judge examined each exhibit carefully. Then came Daniel's testimony. He walked to the witness stand with the same quiet dignity he had shown from the beginning. Rebecca asked only simple questions. Did Mr. Parker represent himself as acting on behalf of his mother? Yes. Were you ever allowed to speak directly with Mrs. Parker? No. Did you later contact her voluntarily? Yes. Why? Daniel looked toward me before answering. Because when I entered that house, I realized it wasn't the home of someone who had chosen to leave. The courtroom became completely silent. He described the family photographs, the untouched belongings, the overflowing mailbox, Grace's statement that I was recovering from heart surgery. Then he said something I will never forget. I've bought and sold property for 30 years. But that was the first time I ever believed a house itself was trying to tell me something. Even the judge looked thoughtful. Next came Linda Foster. She explained the rushed timeline, the skipped verification, the office procedures that had not been followed. Finally, Rebecca called the forensic document examiner once more to explain why the power of attorney could not be considered reliable. When Rebecca finished, she sat down. The judge turned toward Ethan. Mr. Parker, you may testify if you wish. For several seconds, Ethan remained seated. Then slowly he stood. He walked to the witness stand without looking at anyone. His attorney asked only a few questions. Did you experience serious financial difficulties? Yes. Did you intend to harm your mother? No. Did you believe selling the property would eventually benefit your family? Yes. Then Rebecca stood for cross-examination. She approached quietly. Mr. Parker, did you tell Daniel Brooks that your mother wanted a quick sale? Yes. Was that true? No. Did you tell Grace Miller your mother had decided to move? Yes. Was that true? No. Did you tell your mother everything at the lake house was exactly as she had left it? Ethan lowered his eyes. Yes. Was that true? No. Rebecca paused. Then she asked one final question. When your mother was lying in a hospital bed recovering from open heart surgery, did you tell her the house had already been sold? A long silence followed. Everyone in the courtroom waited. Finally, Ethan answered. No. Rebecca nodded once. No further questions. The judge removed his glasses and looked down at the stack of exhibits before him. After several minutes of reviewing the documents, he spoke. The evidence presented today establishes substantial defects in the alleged authority used to convey this property. He looked directly at Ethan. The court finds the purported power of attorney legally invalid. My heart began pounding. The forensic evidence further establishes that the seller's signature on the closing documents is not authentic. Daniel quietly placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. The judge continued. Accordingly, the conveyance of the Parker Lake property is declared void. I closed my eyes as tears filled them. It is further ordered that title to the property be restored to Mrs. Mildred Parker. The courtroom disappeared around me. For weeks I had feared I might never walk through my own front door again. Now, with a few measured sentences, the law had returned what deceit had tried to take away. Then the judge looked toward Daniel. Mr. Brooks, you acted in good faith throughout this transaction. The judge acknowledged that Daniel had purchased the property without knowing of the fraud, and that financial issues relating to the purchase price would be resolved through subsequent proceedings. Daniel simply nodded. I understand, Your Honor. As everyone slowly began gathering their papers, I looked across the courtroom. Ethan was still standing, not arguing, not protesting, just staring at the floor. For the first time since all of this began, he looked like a man who finally understood that losing a lawsuit was not the greatest consequence of what he had done. Losing his mother's trust was. People often imagine that winning in court feels like the end of the story. It doesn't. Sometimes it's simply the moment when the silence begins. After the hearing, reporters never surrounded us. There were no television cameras waiting outside the courthouse. Just gray skies, a cool Michigan breeze, and 3 people standing quietly on the courthouse steps. Daniel, Rebecca, me. Rebecca slipped the final folder into her briefcase. The court's order will be recorded this afternoon. So it's official? I asked. She smiled. It is. The title returns to you. Daniel let out a slow breath. I'm glad. He wasn't smiling. Not because he wasn't happy. Because he understood something many people don't. Justice rarely feels joyful when the person standing on the other side is someone you love. Rebecca shook my hand. You've been stronger than you realize. I didn't feel strong. Most people who truly are don't. She excused herself to finish the remaining paperwork, leaving Daniel and me standing together. For several moments, we watched people walk in and out of the courthouse. Life continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Finally, Daniel spoke. I think your son is waiting. I followed his gaze. Across the parking lot, Ethan stood beside his SUV, alone. Vanessa was gone. He wasn't looking at us. I was looking at the ground. You don't have to talk to him, Daniel said. I know. But I think I should. Daniel nodded. I'll wait over there. He walked toward a nearby bench, giving us privacy without leaving completely. I slowly crossed the parking lot. Every step felt heavier than the last. When Ethan finally looked up, his eyes were red. Not from anger, from exhaustion. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't either. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said, I lost. I shook my head. No. You did. You lost a lawsuit. Those aren't the same thing. His shoulders sagged. I deserve that. No. You deserve honesty. He nodded. I've spent weeks thinking about what I'd say if we ever stood here. And I realized there aren't enough words. He looked older than 41 now. His hair seemed grayer, the lines around his eyes deeper. I kept trying to justify what I did. I told myself I was protecting my family. I told myself I'd fix everything. I even convinced myself I'd buy the lake house back before you ever knew. He laughed bitterly. The human mind can build some incredible lies. I listened quietly. But every night, I still had to look in the mirror. His voice cracked. And eventually, I couldn't recognize the man looking back. The wind lifted a few dry leaves across the parking lot. Autumn had arrived while our family was falling apart. I owe you the truth, Ethan continued. All of it. You do. He took a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. I made a list. I frowned. A list? Every lie I told. He handed it to me. I unfolded it slowly. It wasn't 1 page. It was 4. Each item had a date beside it. The first lie. The first forged document. The first conversation with the realtor. The first time he told Grace I was thinking about moving. The first time he assured Daniel I wanted a quick sale. Every deception. Written in his own handwriting. I needed to see it. Why? So I could stop pretending each lie was separate. They weren't. They were one decision. They just kept growing. I folded the pages again. I appreciate your honesty. It's late. I know. But it's real. He looked toward the courthouse. My attorney says cooperating fully is the only thing left. What do you want? He didn't answer immediately, then quietly. I want a chance to become someone my father wouldn't be ashamed of. Richard. His name hung between us. The one person both of us wished could somehow be standing there. I remembered something Richard used to tell Ethan after Little League games. Making an error doesn't define you. refusing to admit it does. I wondered if Ethan remembered. I've been thinking about Dad, I said. So have I. He would have been angry. I know. He also would have expected better. I know. Another silence settled between us. Then Ethan surprised me. I filed for bankruptcy yesterday. I looked up. You did? My business is finished. What about the company? It's being dissolved. And the debts? I'll spend years paying them. He smiled sadly. But they'll be my debts, not yours. For the first time since this nightmare began, I believed he meant every word. Then he reached into his jacket again. This belongs to you. He handed me a small brass key. I stared at it. It was old, worn smooth around the edges. The workshop. I recognized it immediately. Richard's tiny woodworking shed behind the lake house. I found it in my desk. I'd forgotten I still had it. He looked embarrassed. I should have returned it years ago. I closed my fingers around the key. Such a small object, yet somehow it carried more meaning than any legal document ever could. I've been going to counseling, Ethan said quietly. I looked surprised. Since when? The week after you confronted me. I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about who I'd become. He swallowed hard. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect holidays together. I don't expect anything. I only wanted you to know. I'm finally trying to tell the truth. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The expensive watch was gone. The confident smile had disappeared. The carefully rehearsed explanations were gone too. Standing in front of me wasn't the successful businessman who had convinced himself he could outsmart everyone. It was a frightened little boy trapped inside a broken man. That didn't erase what he'd done. It couldn't. Some wounds don't disappear simply because someone apologizes. I need to tell you something. He nodded. I'm listening. I forgive you. His eyes filled immediately. But, I continued before he could speak, forgiveness is not the same as trust. He lowered his head. I understand. I don't know how long it will take. If it ever comes back. I understand. You won't rebuild our relationship with promises. I know. You'll rebuild it with years of honest choices. He nodded slowly. I can do that. I hope so. He wiped his eyes. I'll keep showing up, even if you don't want to see me. I'll keep doing the work. I'll keep telling the truth. I'll earn whatever relationship you're willing to give. I believed he meant it. Not because of what he said, because of how he said it. There was no performance left. Only humility. Only regret. Only responsibility. Before leaving, he hesitated. Mom. Yes. I haven't been back to the lake house. I know. I didn't think I deserved to. He started toward his SUV, then stopped one last time. When you're ready, I'd like to help fix the dock. Dad always said I never finished learning. A small smile touched my face despite everything. No. He always said you quit sanding too early. For the first time in months, Ethan laughed. It lasted only a second. But it was real. As he drove away, I stood alone in the parking lot holding the old brass workshop key. The lawsuit had ended. The property had been returned. But healing was going to take much longer. And somehow I believed Richard would have understood that better than anyone. Winter arrived quietly that year. The first snowfall covered the lake house before Thanksgiving, softening every roofline and blanketing the dock Richard had built so many years before. From my kitchen window, the world looked peaceful again. My life, however, was still learning what peace actually meant. Legally, the house was mine again. Emotionally, it would take much longer before I truly believed no one could take it away. Rebecca continued handling the remaining paperwork for several weeks after the court ruling. Because Daniel had purchased the property in complete good faith, the financial side of the case still needed to be resolved. One afternoon, she invited the three of us to her office. I have good news, she said. Daniel smiled. I could use some. Rebecca placed a settlement agreement on the conference table. The creditors have agreed to release the escrow funds. I looked confused. So the purchase money? was never distributed. Rebecca nodded. It remained protected throughout the litigation. Daniel leaned back in his chair. So everyone gets put back where they started. Essentially, the property returns to Mrs. Parker. The funds return to you. Daniel let out a relieved laugh. I honestly wasn't expecting that. Rebecca smiled. Neither was I. But once the sale was declared void, there was no legal basis for keeping your money in escrow. I turned toward Daniel. You've spent months helping me. You could have walked away the day you learned the truth. You never did. He shrugged gently. I couldn't. Why? He thought for a moment before answering. Because if I had been in your position, I would have prayed someone would do the same for me. That answer sounded exactly like the man I had come to know. Kindness wasn't something Daniel performed, it was simply who he was. Rebecca gathered her papers. There is one more matter. What is it? I asked. Daniel looked at her curiously. She smiled. It concerns the property itself. I frowned. I don't understand. Mr. Brooks has made a request. Daniel looked slightly embarrassed. I hope you don't mind. What request? He cleared his throat. I'd like to sell the property back to you. I blinked. But you already lost the sale. I know. And now the funds are being returned. He nodded. I also paid for insurance. Property taxes. Basic maintenance. I don't want any of that, Rebecca smiled. He insists. Daniel looked at me. I'll accept exactly $1. I stared at him. $1? He nodded. I promised myself something the day I first walked through that front door. If this house truly belonged to you, I would never profit from your pain. Tears immediately filled my eyes. Daniel, he gently interrupted. Please. You don't owe me anything. You've already reminded me that doing the right thing still matters. Rebecca laughed softly. I've argued with him about this for a week. He refuses to change his mind. I reached across the table and took Daniel's hand. You've restored more than a house. You've restored my faith in people. His eyes grew damp. I think your husband would have done the same. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Richard always believed character revealed itself most clearly when nobody expected kindness. He would have liked Daniel very much. A week later, we met at the lake house one final time to complete the remaining paperwork. Snow covered the shoreline. The lake stretched gray beneath the winter sky. Inside the house, Rebecca placed a single document in front of me. This is the final transfer. I smiled. It feels strange. Why? The last signature almost destroyed my life. Rebecca nodded. This one gives it back. I picked up the pen, slowly, carefully. I signed my real name. This time there were no forged strokes, no deception, only truth. Daniel signed immediately afterward. Rebecca notarized the document, then she closed her folder. It's finished. No applause followed, no dramatic speeches, just three people sitting quietly inside a warm living room while snow drifted past the windows. Sometimes the most important endings are the quiet ones. Before leaving, Daniel asked one more question. May I show you something? Of course. He led me toward the old workshop behind the house. Richard's workshop, the little building Ethan had recently returned the key for. I unlocked the door. The familiar scent of cedar and machine oil greeted me. Nothing had changed. Richard's workbench still stood beneath the window. His chisels remained neatly arranged on the wall. His old radio still rested on the shelf exactly where he'd left it years earlier. Daniel walked over to one corner. I found this while checking the building. He handed me a small wooden box. I recognized it immediately. Richard's unfinished projects. Inside were tiny hand-carved pieces, a wooden duck, half of a picture frame, a child's toy sailboat. Then I found something wrapped in an old shop towel. My breath caught. A small wooden plaque. The letters had already been carved. Our family always has a place here. Richard's handwriting appeared on a folded note tucked underneath, finished before next summer. I sat down slowly. He never got the chance. Daniel looked around the workshop. Maybe someone else can. Just then we heard another truck pull into the driveway. Grace stepped out carrying 2 large covered dishes. I figured someone needed homemade chicken pot pie. I laughed. You always know exactly what's needed, she smiled. Not always. But food rarely makes things worse. A few minutes later, another vehicle arrived. I recognized it immediately. Ethan's old pickup. He stepped out cautiously carrying a toolbox. He stopped several yards away. I know I wasn't invited. I looked at him quietly. No, I wasn't. He nodded. I just... He held up the toolbox. Thought the porch railing still needed repair. Richard had mentioned replacing that railing every spring for nearly 5 years. I almost smiled. It's still crooked. I know. I finally learned not to quit sanding too early. Our eyes met. Neither of us mentioned forgiveness, or the lawsuit, or the months of lies. Those things couldn't be erased, but perhaps they didn't have to define every tomorrow. I looked toward the porch. The tools are in the workshop. He glanced at me uncertainly. Does that mean... It means the railing still needs fixing. Nothing more. Nothing less. He nodded once. Thank you. As he disappeared into Richard's workshop, carrying the old brass key, I watched snowflakes drift slowly across the frozen lake. The house had come home. Perhaps. Very slowly. So was my family. The following summer arrived with a kind of morning Richard used to call a gift from God. The lake was perfectly still. Not a single ripple disturbed the water. Mist floated gently above the surface, while the first rays of sunlight slipped through the pine trees surrounding the house. I stood on the porch holding my coffee, exactly where Richard and I had begun nearly every day of our married life. Only this time I was alone. Or so I thought. A hammer struck wood somewhere behind the house. Then another. Then another. I smiled. I already knew who it was. For nearly 6 months, Ethan had driven to the lake house every Saturday morning. Never asking permission to stay, never expecting praise, he simply worked. Some weekends he repaired loose boards beneath the dock. Other weekends he repainted the porch railing, he replaced cracked fence posts, resealed old windows, cleaned gutters, repaired the workshop roof after a spring storm. He never once mentioned forgiveness. He never asked whether I trusted him again. He simply kept showing up. At first we barely spoke. I'd make coffee, he'd nod politely. Then he'd disappear outside with Richard's old toolbox. Around lunchtime, we'd eat sandwiches together. Sometimes in silence. Sometimes we'd talk about the weather, the grandchildren, fishing, anything except the lawsuit. Healing, I discovered, often begins with ordinary conversations. One Saturday I found Ethan sitting alone on the dock after finishing another repair. The toolbox rested beside him. His hands were stained with paint. He looked tired, but peaceful. You finally fixed the loose boards, I said. He smiled. It only took me 20 years. I laughed softly. Your father would still find something crooked. He always did. He'd probably make me redo half of it. He absolutely would. We both laughed, for the first time in a very long while. The laughter didn't hurt. A few weeks later, Vanessa called unexpectedly. I almost didn't answer. When I did, her voice was trembling. I don't know if I have the right to ask. Ask what? If I could come apologize. I remained quiet. She continued. I knew more than I admitted. I kept telling myself Ethan would fix everything before you found out. I didn't stop him. I should have. Her honesty surprised me. I don't expect forgiveness. I just couldn't keep pretending I wasn't responsible. After thinking for several days, I agreed to meet her. Not because I had forgotten, because I no longer wanted bitterness to become another inheritance passed down through our family. She came alone. No excuses. No rehearsed speeches. She simply cried. She admitted she had convinced herself that financial survival justified almost anything. She admitted she ignored warning signs because she was terrified of losing their home and disrupting the children's lives. I chose comfort over courage, she whispered. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. I didn't know what our relationship would become. But I believe truth deserved acknowledgement, and genuine remorse deserved the chance to grow into change. By midsummer, something remarkable happened. The grandchildren returned. Not because anyone forced them, because they wanted to. Emma was 16 now. Jacob had just turned 13. They spent entire afternoons swimming off the dock Richard had built decades earlier. One evening, Emma sat beside me on the porch swing. "Grandma, yes, Dad's different." I looked toward the workshop where Ethan was sanding a wooden bench. "I think he is. He smiles less." I nodded. "But when he does, it feels real." Children often notice what adults overlook. One Saturday morning, Ethan carried something out of the workshop. It was wrapped in an old quilt. "I found this after cleaning." Carefully, he unwrapped it. Richard's unfinished wooden plaque. "Our family always has a place here." The carving remained incomplete. Only part of the border had been finished. "I've been thinking," Ethan said. "I don't want to finish Dad's work." I looked surprised. "You don't know? I'd rather finish it with him." He handed me another piece of wood. Blank. "What if—" he hesitated. "We make a new one together?" The suggestion caught me completely off guard. Richard's project belonged to Richard. But perhaps Ethan was right. Some things shouldn't be completed by replacing the past. They should honor it while creating something new. The following weekend, we spent an entire afternoon in the workshop. Neither of us was especially skilled. Richard would have laughed at our crooked measuring lines, our uneven sanding, our endless debates about which stain looked best. But slowly, board by board, the new plaque took shape. This time it read, "This home was built with love. It stands because truth returned." We hung it above the workshop door, not as a reminder of betrayal, as a reminder that truth eventually finds its way home. Late in August, Daniel visited one last time before taking a long-planned fishing trip to Montana. He stood on the porch admiring the finished railing. "I see someone finally learned how to sand properly." Ethan laughed. "It only took 41 years. Daniel smiled. "Some lessons are worth waiting for." We shared dinner together that evening. Grace brought blueberry pie. The grandchildren chased fireflies across the yard. Vanessa helped wash dishes without anyone asking. For the first time in years, the house sounded like a family again. Not a perfect family, just an honest one. As darkness settled over the lake, Daniel prepared to leave. Before climbing into his truck, he turned toward me. "I've been meaning to ask. What? Do you ever think about selling this place now?" I looked toward the water, the porch, the workshop, the dock, Richard's favorite chair, the maple tree with the old tire swing still hanging beneath one sturdy branch. Then I smiled. "No," he laughed. "I thought that might be your answer. I've learned something." "What?" "A house can survive storms. It can survive snow. It can survive neglect. But it cannot survive dishonesty." I looked toward Ethan, who was teaching Jacob how to tighten a loose deckboard exactly the way Richard had once taught him. Thankfully, truth is an even stronger foundation. The next morning, I woke before everyone else. The lake was perfectly calm again. The first light of dawn stretched across the water in long ribbons of gold. I carried my coffee to the end of the dock, exactly where Richard and I had stood countless times. "I wish you could see them," I whispered into the quiet morning. A gentle breeze crossed the lake. Some people would call it coincidence. Others might call it imagination. I simply smiled, because in that moment, I felt as though he already had. The lake house was never really about wood, or property lines, or legal documents. It was about promises. Promises between husband and wife, between parent and child, between generations. Some promises had been broken. Others had been rebuilt. And as the sun finally rose above the trees bathing the lake in warm golden light, I realized something that no court could ever order and no deed could ever guarantee. A home isn't protected by locks, or signatures, or even ownership. A home survives because the people inside it choose honesty over convenience, love over pride, and truth over fear. That morning, surrounded by the people who had learned those lessons the hard way, I knew the lake house had finally become what Richard always dreamed it would be. Not simply a place where our family lived, but a place where our family found its way back to one another. When I look back on everything that happened, I realize this story was never really about a lake house. It was about trust, the most valuable thing we can ever give another person, and the most painful thing to lose. Money can be earned again. Property can sometimes be recovered. But once trust is broken, it takes far more than words to rebuild. It takes humility, honesty, patience, and countless small choices made every single day. I also learned that love should never blind us to the truth. Loving someone does not mean excusing every mistake they make. Sometimes the greatest act of love is holding someone accountable because accountability gives them the opportunity to become the person they were always capable of being. Forgiveness is a gift, but forgiveness does not erase consequences. It simply allows our hearts to heal, while wisdom teaches us to set healthy boundaries. Perhaps the greatest surprise in my journey was discovering that kindness sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. A complete stranger chose integrity over convenience, compassion over profit, and because of that decision, an entire family's future changed. Daniel reminded me that there are still good people in this world, people who do the right thing even when no one is watching and even when it costs them something. Never underestimate the difference one honest person can make in someone else's life. Most of all, I hope you remember this. A home is never defined by its walls, its price, or the name written on a deed. A true home is built with love, protected by honesty, strengthened by forgiveness, and kept alive through the memories we create together. As long as those things remain, hope is never truly lost. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear from you. Have you ever had someone betray your trust, or have you ever been given a second chance that changed your life? Please share your thoughts in the comments, because your story may encourage someone else who is quietly carrying the same pain. And before you go, if you enjoy heartfelt family dramas with meaningful life lessons, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you're watching from, may your home always be filled with love, truth, and people who choose to stand by you when it matters most.